We're going to be working through a little bit of a mobility sequence that's going to be mostly related to internal and external rotation of the hip. But we're going to move our low back and our spine a little bit before we get into the hip stuff. Okay, so we're going to take this position here on the mat where my knees are under my hips. And then I'm in a kind of tabletop back position. From here, I'm going to drop to my forearms and I'm going to place my head in my hands. Placing my head in my hands is going to round my upper back, which is what we want in this position. So we're going to intentionally round through the upper back so that I can now lock that position in and I can focus on moving through the lower chunk of my spine. I'm going to collect a few reps of the movement through my low back. Now, we're going to go through a little bit more global flexion and extension of the spine. Once we're done a few reps of our global extension through the spine, we're going to get into some hip stuff. So, before we start to add in any sort of activation, we're just going to work on finding a stretch. The first stretch we're going to find is going to be in the 90-90 position. So I'm setting up my 90-90 by looking at this front knee here and making sure it's shooting forward out of my hip. And I'm making sure that this back knee is also shooting out of my hip. And then my bends in my knees will be my 90-degree angles. Now from here, with hand on either side of this thigh, I'm going to post up on my hands using my fingertips on the ground so I can gain as much height as possible through my spine. And I want to imagine right now that I had Iron Man's heart, and Iron Man's heart is shooting forward and slightly up towards the sky. Another thing I want to think about is this bottom hip here is pulling back in that direction of the back wall. And then I also want to think about maintaining as much of a slight arch through my low back. With those things in combination, I should be able to feel a slight stretching sensation in the bottom side of this leg. I can start to shift my weight forward as I hinge at my hip, but not allow back to move. I'll show you a different angle. So again, I'm here, I'm in my 90-90, and then arching, Iron Man's heart facing forward, and now I'm just gently hinging from the hip in order to find the stretch. We're going to sit here for the prescribed amount of time, and then we'll transition to the next series. We've been sitting in the 90-90 position for a bit now, and we're going to work on some kinetic stretching from this position here. So before we get into our kinetic stretching, we need to feel the tissue on this side of the leg. That's our regressive tissue. That's the stuff that's going to help us pull into the basement of the stretch. So what I want you to do, hands on the same position, but instead of that leaning forward to feel the stretch, we're going to back off a bit. We're going to back out of that position, and we're going to work on lifting this leg here off the ground. So both my ankle and my knee are going to lift at the same time, and I'm going to try to lift that leg up. Okay? So hands are posting. I'm going to lean back as much as I need to, and I'm going to lift that leg up off the floor. Try to hover the heel and the knee off the ground. So if I came over and put my hand, I can just kind of graze underneath that leg. And then drop that leg back down. Let's do that one more time. We're gonna lift up, lift, 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 lift. Try to lift a little bit higher if you can, and come back down. What you should have felt there was this stuff here on the front side of your leg, or your inner thigh stuff, working to pull your leg up off the floor. Okay, so now, with that in mind, imagine I came over to you and I just glued all of this to the floor. So all the shin and knee and even ankle is now super glued to the floor. Now that we have our leg glued to the floor, if I was gonna go pull my leg off the ground, I can't anymore. So now my chest is gonna start to get pulled down towards this leg, okay? So let's try that out. We're gonna do a repetition of slowly pulling our chest over top of this front knee. So again, imagine that leg is glued to the floor. We're gonna try a rep together here. I'm pulling that leg up, and because it's glued to the floor, my chest will start to come down towards that same side knee. Keep pulling into that bottom position. If you have more range, I want you to use it. Continue to pull down. Pull, 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 pull. We're still thinking about pulling this whole leg up off the floor. And we're gonna freeze here. Good. And now switching into pushing this leg down into the ground. So we're in the bottom of the stretch and we're using the stuff that's on stretch to help push us out of the position. So I'm pushing this leg into the ground as I slowly come back into the top of that 90-90. Let's try out another rep here. Start to pull, 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 pull this leg up. Find the basement of the stretch. And freeze and switch, push, 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 push that leg into the ground. Continue to push all the way through. Keep pushing, keep pushing. I want you to feel that stuff that was on stretch now working. And we're nice and tall again. You would continue to work for the prescribed amount of repetitions here in our kinetic stretching for the externally rotated leg. So we're gonna get back into that 90-90 position, but now instead of working on the front leg, we're gonna work on the back leg. So for the back leg in the 90-90, make sure I have my 90-degree angle set up, and then I'm gonna kickstand this hand out to the floor. So I'm almost leaning over my left shoulder right now. And then I'm gonna try to sag this hip down towards the ground. As I'm sagging this hip down towards the ground, I'm gonna start to feel a stretching sensation cutting across this hip. Now from here, I'm gonna take this hand and I'm gonna start to post it behind my back. If I can get nice and tall here and still maintain that stretch without feeling my low back stuff come in, then that's what I'll do. Most people tend to overemphasize the rotation of the chest in this position, which causes more rotation of my spine, but I don't need as much of that. I just want this sagging of the hip and placing the hand on the ground. If I'm quite mobile, I can come a little taller, get that sag, maybe reach back to here. You can try that out if you want. I prefer actually this position, just so I can feel that stuff. Again, we're just stretching the back stuff right now. We're not doing much work here. So you're gonna sit in this stretch for the prescribed amount of time before we move into the next drill. Now from here, the next thing we're gonna work on from the 90-90 is a lift off drill of this back leg. So there's a couple ways we can do this. I'll show you from here, because it is quite hard to stay tall in this position and elevate this back ankle for most people. I like to start by leaning off to the side even more. And now from here, I'm gonna lean forward. My hand can come to my knee, and then I'm gonna lift that heel up off the floor. As I'm lifting this heel up, you notice how my whole lower leg came off the floor. It's because I got rotation through this hip. So internal rotation, lift off here, and then back down. We're gonna lift off, and then come back down. You can also try a different option here, where your kickstand hand comes a little bit taller, and then this hand grabs onto the ankle, knee, or post on the floor. Try to minimize the lean forward until a point where your ankle bone just comes off the ground, maybe like a millimeter, centimeter, a small amount. So we're gonna fight for that. And I'm barely lifting, but I'm lifting, and back down. If I wanna progress a little bit more, I'll lean back a little further, post, and lift. Barely coming off the floor, really fighting for this position through my spine, and back down. So try that out for the prescribed amount of time, and also you can play around with that base position and do whatever feels best. So the leaning out and forward more will make it easier. The staying upright and leaning back will make it a lot more challenging.